You talked about a couple of more hikes, same time that the metals spiked. Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And today we are digging back into gold and silver, especially as we have now had the Fed's latest meeting and the press conference. Here with my friend David Stein. We're recording on Wednesday afternoon. So just shortly after the Fed's press conference, where Jerome Powell had his usual riveting testimony, and we will touch on some of the highlights of that as well as the gold and silver reaction. But before we dig into that, as well as some other gold and silver news and just the things that are going on out there in the metals world, David, it's great to have you back on the show and nice to see you again. And how's everything going today?
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. Happy New Year. I think this is the first time we've talked this year, and yeah, just can't wait to get into it this year. Lots of things going on, and hoping for a better year than last year.
Well, so far, I'd say we're, especially on the gold side, off to a good start. And I think in many ways, hopefully, I guess we don't take enough time to mention this, but hopefully life and health for people in general just going well, because there are things outside of the financial markets, even if that's what we normally talk about on the show. Although amazing, we're already a month into the 2023. And since you mentioned that, today, as we're recording on February 1st, this will be posted Thursday the 2nd. But David, would you like to remind everyone, we talked about it before we started, what today is the anniversary of?
It's the second anniversary of Silver Squeeze.
That's right. And amazing. 2 years have gone by already. And there you can see the blue line was the 29th, silver down at 26 bucks. And you were talking about that roundtable we did over the weekend where there was a lot of attention placed on gold and silver. A lot of the retail dealers did not necessarily run out of supply, but ran out of hedge supply. And hence we see that big spike up on the Sunday night. And of course, the green line would be February 1st, when if you're actually looking at the futures price, touched over $30 before coming back down. And then with this chart that I just updated, we can see that by the February 2nd, which was the Tuesday, already we had prices lower despite record-setting demand into the SLV fund and from the bullion side. But before we get to the Fed press conference, any thoughts on the things that have transpired in that 2-year period since then? While the price slightly lower, certainly a lot of unusual things have happened. And what are your recollections or feedback on the last 2 years?
Well, I guess, purely from the metals, the silver metal point of view, because, silver as a commodity and obviously the equities, like the company that I run, Kuya, they can act very differently, even if their fundamentals are, similar or the same. But anyway, so in terms of the metal itself, I mean, I guess it's been a good couple of years to build up, a new following for silver. I think that's been sort of mission accomplished in terms of the movement, and getting a lot more new people and younger people interested in commodities and especially in silver. And it's a lot of other macro things have happened in the past 2 years. I think when the Fed started finally raising interest rates in middle of last year, that really killed momentum for a lot of risk assets, including the metals, and we sort of gradually just worked our way back from there. So you're right. We're sitting almost where we were 2 years ago. With silver at about 24 now, and the fundamentals look really good. We all know about silver's uses. We know about the monetary side of silver as well, which again seems to keep growing, and I think will keep growing in the next few years. The world's a much more risky place today than it was 2 years ago, I would say, with what's going on in Ukraine. Definitely tensions with China are raised or elevated as well. So that's how I would sum up the last 2 years for silver.
Yeah, and well said. Again, back there when the price was touching over $30 for a few hours, found out in that interesting report from the LBMA that came out a couple months later, in their words, that they were weeks away from running out of silver. Never heard too much more about that. Heard that the amount of metal that allegedly went into the trust was miscounted. And then, of course, in the time since then, it's interesting what might have happened had the Fed not been raising interest rates, because last couple months we saw those reports from Silver Institute, record demand, record deficit, and paints an interesting picture of what we have going forward. Although coming back to the present day, as I mentioned earlier, we had the
Sorry,
latest
can I just say something about that chart?
Sure.
You made a really good point, which I kind of want to jump on here, which is that if you sort of take out this, what is it, 6-8 month blip where, from May of 2022, where silver got crushed, went all the way down to September, and then sort of bounced back up again by end of the year. So that's 7 months. So other than that 7 month blip, the price has been pretty stable. I mean, it was really holding in between sort of 24 and 26, right? For most of 2021, 22. So it goes to show that, maybe that was a bit just a very sort of short-term blip, trading related, in the fundamental story, which is a lot stronger.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Here we have the chart going back to February of 2020. This is a 3-year chart, and you can see it's hovered around that range. And certainly, as you mentioned, we had that dip, which, again, it was interesting. I think, right? You see the very bottom of it was when we were at the Silver Symposium last year, and certainly a tough time to be at a silver-focused conference when we were at the absolute bottom, yet fascinating that we've seen this rise, because that's happened while the Fed is still raising interest rates. Again, on Wednesday, they raised a 1/4 point, which was largely expected. Though interesting reaction in the metals, you see here, this was during the press conference, spike up in silver, spike up as well in gold. Be interesting by the time this airs on Thursday. We'll see how things have been looking since then. But going to play a short snippet of Jerome Powell here, just so people can hear this, and something that I thought was one of the more significant things from his press conference, and you can give your comment, but let's take a couple seconds listening to Jerome here.
So we've raised rates 4.5 percentage points, and we're talking about a couple of more rate hikes to get to that level we think is appropriately restrictive. And why do we think that's probably necessary? We think because inflation is still running very hot. We're, of course, taking into account long and variable lags, and we're thinking about that.
So he thinks inflation is still running hot, that there are some lags. And interesting that it was around the time he was saying that, though, that you talked about a couple of more hikes, same time that the metals spiked, a little bit of a counterintuitive reaction. But David, any thoughts on the latest news out of the Fed, or making some sense out of the reaction that we've seen there?
Well, I mean, it sounds like he's being more hawkish than our central bank governor in Canada. So that's just kind of interesting, because that's a big factor of how currencies and therefore metals trade is and the precious metals in particular is depends on the delta between different countries and what their policies are. And so that's kind of the interesting thing that I pull out of that. I mean, I guess he's really trying to not give too much away at this point, and just keep the options open for the next meeting.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and at times it almost feels as if maybe the markets just, to some degree, aren't believing what he's saying. And we have seen the inflation rates, at least according to the government numbers, come down. and especially a point that Craig Hemke had on the show when he was here last week. So a lot of the bigger inflation numbers that are included in those year-over-year reviews that come out will be filtering out. So while one could debate whether prices are really slowing down as much, at least there's reason to suggest that the inflation numbers themselves will be coming down, and we'll see. I think a lot of people still expecting that pause or perhaps reversal later this year. And again, David, are you surprised that we have seen as much movement in gold and silver over these past couple months while they've still been going and raising rates higher?
In a way, no, and the reason is that because the incremental raises now don't really do that much on a percentage basis. So they've gone from basically the machete in May, where they were making huge percentage moves in terms of the interest rate delta. Now to move a quarter point on whatever 4% is percentage basis is pretty small. That's now they're more in the fine tuning phase, and so in that sense, I'm not surprised that metals are trading higher, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the when the full pivot is, when people realize the full pivot. I think that's bound to happen. We're definitely seeing a lot of cracks in our economy in Canada. We're a more sensitive economy to interest rates, I think, in general. And so I think it's just a matter of time before that kind of spills over, and you see it more in the US as well.
Yeah, and what do you think will actually happen when they do get to the point where they lower interest rates? It's interesting, in his previous press conference from December, he talked about how their summary of economic projections showed, I believe it was 4.1% at the end of 2024, 3.1% in 2023. So while they're talking about raising rates now, I mean, they're acknowledging that in the future they are planning to take them lower. And do you have any particular thoughts on when they do cut interest rates at some point? Do you think that will be just a watershed moment for gold and silver?
Well, I think gold and silver it will predict that it happens before it happens. So you'll see the metals moving ahead of it. That's my thought. But regardless of the exact timing, I think it will be a watershed moment. I think that will be that'll mark a big upswing in the price of the metals for sure.
Well, I'm inclined to agree with you on that one, and I suppose we'll see. I guess mid 2023, not all that far off, as we're now a month into the year already. Another thing that happened recently over the weekend, we had the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. Interesting article here about our metals headed for a golden age. Something that I think you'd be well qualified to talk about, because midway through they mentioned there's been a general underinvestment in new supply for many metals, including gold. Obviously, we've talked about silver, but it seems like a lot of the metals that are going to be needed for this green revolution, there's going to be problems meeting that. And is this in line with what you've been seeing, that we're really going to be facing some gaps going forward?
Yeah, definitely. I think the peak of the metals investment was probably 2011 or 12, and so we've been 10 years with basically in a declining trend there. So that's one thing. The other thing is just geologically, ore deposits become harder to find over time. The easy ones were found 100 years ago plus, and it's slower, more technology. It's more expensive to find them. Permitting is a lot more slower now in most countries. So it's something where it's going to be very difficult for the metals to catch up. I'm speaking about all metals, not silver in particular, but silver follows this trend exactly. And I mean, really, obviously this article is, kind of biased because it comes from our industry, but I don't think metals and mining investments is really a big theme of generalist investors yet, like it was in 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, in that era. And there's nothing particularly exciting about the equities prices in general. I think if you look at the indexes, they're still pretty weak, although they have rebounded off the lows, but they're not anywhere in bull market territory. And the other factor, going back to your question, is when we do get a surge in investment, those dollars tend to go into, or a lot of the dollars can get sucked up by sort of grassroots exploration, and those types of companies, and they very few of them ever actually find anything, let alone build a mine, and if they do, it takes 10 plus years. So it really has nothing to do with the metals actual supply demand. Very, very little to do with it, except over a decade long kind of, if you look at it over decades, it might, but in the short term, it has no effect whatsoever.
Yeah, and you mentioned in terms of demand of whether people are looking out to the metals yet, and I continue to find it interesting. We may have talked about this before, but I think worth sharing again. Saudi Arabia courts Australian miners for $170 billion plan. And while it seems like the US and Canadian governments are not too concerned about the things that are going on here, interesting trend where we see OPEC countries creating infrastructure to trade outside of the dollar. A lot of countries in the East making investments in metals and things that would be required for this green movement. So certainly a difference in the way different parts of the globe are looking at this. Although with that said, David, here's another thing that I'd love to get your opinion on. Don't see often, but recently we had on CNBC, silver prices could touch a 9-year high in 2023. They're even talking about insufficient supplies of silver. And I believe down here, you even have silver shortage in the mainstream news. Also, last week, silver ETFs likely record huge upside in 2023. Now that's Yahoo talking about it. And also recently we had Fox Business News, gold and silver boom predicted as the US hits its debt ceiling. Maybe some select stories, but I found it interesting just seeing that some of the more mainstream outlets are even talking about gold and silver, and not saying that that's flooding the Wall Street consensus yet, but perhaps at least a good sign that the word is getting out there of some of these things that are going on.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, I think if you go back a couple of years, all of the talk about, the weaknesses or failures of monetary policy and inflation were going to be solved by Bitcoin and crypto, and that, I think, was a little bit of a missed opportunity, for precious metals a few years ago. But now it seems to be they're getting looked on more seriously by generalists, and so I think that does bode well for the next leg up for sure.
Yeah, and I'll pull this one back up for a second. Kind of funny, we have expert government spending is a major problem, and yes, we have noticed. I wouldn't imagine you have any thoughts on how the U.S. is going to address the debt ceiling other than raise it, or any thoughts? Maybe we'll finally see the $1 trillion platinum coin thrown out there. Seems like it's getting pretty silly at this point with like, why have the thing if you're just going to end up raising it after a political squabble over the thing. But I'm assuming you don't think that the debt ceiling is going to be held in place and actually prevent the whole thing from going further into debt. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that the debt ceiling is really more of a political issue than anything else. And so I mean, I think that is a volatile volatile point, because obviously the Congress is very deeply divided right now, and yeah, I think that could be a risk to the market. I was surprised that they um, that there was, I guess it was earlier in January, they said they were going to hit the debt ceiling, and then Yellen said, but she can like manage stuff, move things around for 6 more months or something before like they really stop have to default on paying people and stuff. So
It
I guess
sounds a lot like accounting fraud, doesn't it?
I I guess we're in that 6 month period now. So we'll we'll see.
Yeah, and I mean, meanwhile, while you have that going on, someone that many people who watch the show are familiar with, Zoltan Pozar, mentions in finance, everything is about marginal flows. These matter the most for largest marginal borrow, the US Treasury. If less trade is invoiced in US dollars and there's a dwindling recycling of dollar surpluses into traditional reserve assets such as treasuries, the exorbitant privilege the dollar holds as the international reserve currency could be under assault. And I think it might be fair to say that it is under assault at this point. Perhaps there's not the replacement out there yet, although it seems like there's a lot of places around the globe where they're banding together, trying to figure out what that could look like. Um, so perhaps not to say the dollar is going to end today or in the next year, but it seems like people are getting a little bit fed up with that. Would you agree with that?
We're hitting on some really big topics today. um, yeah, I mean, my sense is that the trend, it is trending in that way, but this could be a trend that could take decades to really play out. This is a very slow process of what happens to empires and over human history. And I think the problem with any alternative right now is that the countries that see the U.S. dollar as a threat probably really deep down don't trust each other either. So you get that, and that's really the benefit of the U.S. dollar, is that you still have a large majority, and especially of where the GDP is in the world is allied with the U.S. and trusts the U.S. And so so the U.S. dollar has that going for it, but the cracks are starting to form, and I think over the coming years and decades, I think we'll see that play out, whether that is picking one leader like China and going to that as a sort of a second reserve currency, and some of these other countries doing a lot of trade in Chinese yuan, or whether they make up a new currency. I don't, that's really tough to say.
Yeah, I don't think there's a set answer out there just yet, although perhaps, at least in my opinion, has a lot to do with why we do see gold over $1,900, even in the face of the rate hikes. And of course, there was even a paper by the IMF last week talking about gold and how some of the countries are concerned after what they saw with Russia getting kicked out of the SWIFT system last year. So certainly be interesting to see how these things unfold going forward. And David, before we wrap up, though, I was hoping you could give us an update on how things are coming along at Kuya, as you're one of the people that is going to hopefully help chip in with this silver deficit that we're seeing as you're on the road to going into production later this year. And perhaps you could give people an update of how things are coming along.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, our strategy with Kuya and our flagship Bethania asset is to start off with a modest operation that can be expanded over time, and we're on track to do that. We hit a number of really great milestones, positive milestones in 2022, including the first ever resource estimate, getting the plant design and the plant site permitted, for a new plant tailings to build there at some point at site, and that's in the picture and behind me there. We also made a number of new discoveries, and so we've really extended the basically the known mineralization at surface. So we have a lot more places to go and drill and grow that resource by multi times what it is now today, in our opinion. And then finally, we also did a really positive PEA on the plant, on that first stage plant that we designed. So with all of those milestones, sort of in the books, now we're looking at getting some early production this year. Hopefully, we'll be able to make more announcements on that in the next few weeks and months. We'll be able to prove the concept. We'll be able to make money, basically right away at these prices, even at smaller tonnages, and then we'll ramp it up from there. And with the ultimate goal to build the plant as we originally designed, and we're on track to do all that. And if ideally we'll also do exploration at the same time, because frankly the exploration story at Bethania has actually gotten a lot better than even I would have expected, let's say a year or two ago. With being able to acquire Carmelita and then making that new discovery, Carmelitas Norte, it's really expanded the amount of veins that we have on surface to drill at depth. And I mean, that's basically how the Bethania deposit evolved. The original mine where we have our resource, it evolved from a surface discovery on the side of a hill, and they basically went in and started mining it. And these high grade veins can be very, very rich and rewarding. We don't do things that way nowadays. We drill first and we make a proper mine plan. So that's what we'll be doing as we go forward. But it's definitely nice to know that we have so much mineralization around, and that should give us years and years of exploration and growth with the resource. And it really makes the likelihood of a further expansion of the plant, after we build the first one, we'll probably be right away looking at expanding it. So it's exciting. Lots to do there. It's been a really, really tough market for us, particularly. I have to acknowledge that. It's our share price has not done very well. Whether that's Peru or whatever, but our guys in Peru have delivered. They've delivered permits, they've delivered exploration success, and all the other technical milestones that we've asked of them. So we've really got a tiger by the tail here, and look forward to developing it in this year and going forward.
Yeah, I know that you've been moving things forward, and obviously a lot of the silver stocks had a tough year in 2022. And but I think something we talked about last time, maybe the last thing you could touch on, is that in terms of the actual fundamentals and the progress you've had there, everything seems to be still on track as far as that side so far.
Yeah, I think I would stack up our results in 2022 up against anyone else's, and I think we did a fantastic job. Unfortunately, when you're in the wrong sector or you're in the wrong whatever, as an equity, you don't always get paid for that immediately. So that's one of the one of the risks of being a public company, I guess. But it's also an opportunity for new investors to get in really cheap. So I think that's the way I see it right now.
Well, appreciate that, David. And for people who do have questions, would like to find out more about what you're doing there, could you just let them know the website and how they could best get those answered?
Yeah, go to the website, www.kuyasilver.com, and from there you can subscribe to our email, and or you can just contact us directly. You can see the tab up there that Chris clicked on. That's a great way to contact us. That's probably the best way. It'll get us directly.
Well, appreciate that. Appreciate that you do communicate to your investors, and also that you continue to come out and speak. Obviously, a tough year last year, although I think there's a lot to be said for making yourself available to answer the questions and let people know at least what's going on, so they can decide whether that is something that's suitable for them. So Also
Yeah.
appreciate you coming by and talking some silver with everything that's going on and with the Fed's meeting today. And be fun to see how silver reacts by the time this is posted on Thursday. But just great to catch up with you again, and Happy New Year to you, my friend. And look forward to doing this again soon.
Thanks. It was fun. Thanks, Chris.